and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we discuss the week's hottest legal topics. Now, we are breaking this into two this week. It is week 2 of Donald Trump's jury trial for the Alvin Bragg charges in New York and Manhattan for the Stormy Daniels case. We are going to talk about what has happened this week in terms of the opening statements, who the first witness has been, what he has testified to, which has been quite exciting. Among other things, we're going to give you our legal opinions as attorneys, as constitutional law scholars, as what it means. Is it good trial strategy? Who might be winning the arguments? Why the first witness was called as he was? What's happening with those contempt hearings? What other statements has he continued to make? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. We are also going to make a separate video regarding the Supreme Court argument on the privileged immunity case, because that happened Thursday of the second week of Trump's jury trial. These are so monumental. They're both so monumental that they deserve their own videos. So stay tuned with us for this one for the jury trial, week 2. And then find us on the next one that we will also publish regarding the Supreme Court hearing the argument regarding privileged immunity. I'm Virginia Tarani. I am the owner and attorney for Tarani Law LLC, because you never need a lawyer till you do. I am also the owner of the Law Unscripted, which is the company that hosts this podcast of the Legal Weekly Wine. We also have a lot of bar prep and law school prep. So law students, go to our website. In addition to listening to the podcasts, which are completely free, go there. You can find some outlines, some bar classes, some lectures. Pick and choose what you want or buy the entire program. The bar is coming up. I am joined by Chelsea Rogers, who is the other attorney in Tarani Law LLC, as well as the co-host of both the Legal Weekly Wine and the Law Unscripted podcasts. Thanks for joining us, Chelsea.
I'm happy to be here as usual. Very excited. We keep having really good topics, you know?
They're just spoon-fed to us this year. It's
That's
like we
what
don't
I'm
have to
saying.
search for them. They're just dropped in our laps.
Absolutely.
What else do we do? I mean, we have to talk about it as lawyers. I want to drive to New York and sit in the courtroom. That's all I want to do. And I'm like, no, I have an actual practice that I need to do. But that's my desire. Maybe the next one.
We take the show on the road and just go and sit in courtrooms and be nosy.
Just do the podcast in the hotel.
Yes.
We'll do it. I mean, we have how many different trials that allegedly are, coming up. So maybe we can drive to the next one. You're close to the Georgia one.
That's true. Look, they wouldn't put me on the jury, so I'm just going to go be there and, listen.
Take notes, report back.
Absolutely.
Now, Dr. Vial is also with us. This is John Vial. He's the Dean of the Honors College for Middle Tennessee State University, my alma mater. And he's really our expert. We're just attorneys who go to the courtroom, and he's our expert on constitutional law, the Constitution, the amending process, how it all works. And he's going to help us break down a lot of what's happening in the trial. And he will also be our point person on the next video. So if you're really looking for the Supreme Court arguments, he's going to be our main point person on that. So check that out. Dr. Vial, it's good to have you.
Good to be here.
All right.
And you think lawyers have it bad? Mm-hmm. Try being a college professor, trying to keep up.
Oh my goodness. And especially this week, we're not talking about the topic, but the college professors across the nation, especially the Ivy Leagues, this week, we have the protests going on the college campuses. So,
and also a major abortion argument this week too.
Correct. It's just, we don't have enough time to do all of these subjects. It's such a disappointment.
We could do a 24-hour live stream for 24 hours straight
CNN.
and not cover everything. Right.
For Fox, I'm not sure which.
True. We're not quite the news, but we do like the legal topics. We're trying to catch up on some of them. So do stay tuned. We are trying to put out a couple a week rather than just one a week right now with everything that's going on. So we will always have one as long as the Trump trial is going on for the weeks of the Trump trial. And then we'll see what else comes up in the arguments and on campuses and across the nation and the courts, because that's what we focus on is the legal weekly news. And everything's legal right now.
Basically.
Anyway, okay, so because we're talking about such crazy topics, we do have wine with us because it is the Legal Weekly Wine. Chelsea, let's start with you. You have the biggest glass.
Always. Look, hey, I will give any excuse. But to no one's surprise, I'm back at it with the Franzia boxed wine. But we have Moscato today, a nice little sweet treat. Look, the weather is so warm here in Georgia that I needed something that was like light and sweet.
I love it. And okay, so that's another count against the live stream for 24 hours because we are the weekly wine. I think you'd see us falling out by, a couple hours in.
I have trained my entire life for it. I would be ready. And I think the commentary would be incredible.
You need my technique here.
Yes, the water.
The water.
Absolutely. Dr. Vial would be fine and he could continue the commentary, but Chelsea and I might drop out.
But we could mix it with energy drinks, bring back like the old school Four Loko style. Look.
And we'll be in the hospital.
That's true.
But, at fun times. So, Dr. Vial, you've got your water.
Yes.
Brought to you by Pepsi Products.
Yes, probably.
On campus. Yeah. Middle Tennessee supports Pepsi. That's the products they have. Mm-hmm. Are they the ones with Dr. Pepper?
Which
Is Pepsi Dr. Pepper?
I know your mother loves Dr. Pepper.
I think so.
Yeah, whichever company it is, I have to support the Dr. Pepper, but otherwise I'm a Coke person.
Big Dr. Pepper girl.
Yeah, I mean, our office manager and my twin sister, Rebecca, I've never known someone to love Dr. Pepper so much. So we have to support that company. Okay, so let's, I have got our favorite red wine, the very first one we ever did on our podcast, the Dark Horse Cabernet Sauvignon. Love this wine. Take it everywhere. If I'm going to a house party or anywhere else, if I'm taking it as a gift, this is the wine that's my go-to. Almost everybody loves it, and it's somewhere between $9 and $19. So it's a very good, practical wine that tastes amazing. So cheers to both of you, and let's get this started.
Let's do it. Cheers.
Okay. Week 2 of the Trump jury trial. We're going to break it up a little bit. We are going to break this into opening statements, the contempt hearings, and the first witness that has been called to the stand that's been testifying for 3 days. Dr. Vial, which one would you like to choose?
Probably the second or third.
Okay.
Let somebody else start.
Okay, fair enough. I know you were actually very interested in the first witness. So why don't I let you take the lead on that? But you're right. There are a few things that happened before the first witness. So Chelsea, would you like to take the opening statement or would you like to take the contempt hearings that we had?
I can do either. I think my first comment, though, I will say this. I'm surprised at how fast things are moving along. I think it's going a lot quicker than I anticipated it. The judge seems to want to get things on the road, So there's that. We can start with that. And then the contempt hearings, we can also talk about that.
Let's do it.
We don't really have anything happening. We don't know.
Let me mention one, since to go to the opening statements, which is the first one.
Right.
Is sometimes you don't know how good an opening statement is until the end of the trial.
Yes,
because
true.
the one thing that neither side can afford to do and continue credibility is to promise something that you don't deliver.
Right. That's so true.
My impression is, I think what the prosecution, and I'm still not sure that they're going to gain a conviction, but the main thing they're trying to do is put this in story form.
Yes.
It's a very good way to do it.
It's the only way this one makes sense.
Right.
It's complicated.
And particularly, they're starting with a witness who it seems like as big a sleazeball as any of them.
He's the owner of the National Enquirer.
Right. I mean, someone who is openly admitting to paying tens of thousands of dollars to kill a story rather than to publish it. That doesn't seem to be in very good form. But he's not someone who's he's pled out apparently, and apparently the prosecutors chose between he and Cohen that he was the one to give the plea deal to. And he does, and he smiles a lot, apparently. He was a close friend and still doesn't seem to be openly criticizing Trump in the same way that Cohen is.
He even didn't he say hello to Trump in the courtroom?
He did. I'm not sure that Trump really said hello back.
I wouldn't have either.
But yeah. But there is a concern. I think, the defense seems to sort of shrug and say nothing to see here. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong with campaigning. Nothing wrong with giving campaign donations. And I think the key is a lot of this is going to be fairly technical. Now, you have a very educated jury by comparison, mm-hmm. 2 attorneys, some bankers, a teacher, a speech therapist, and the like. But hopefully neither side has overpromised.
Right.
And if they claim that a witness is going to say something and that witness doesn't say it, the jury is going to take note of it. It would undermine their credibility.
And I think it was very smart of the defense not to then, in exactly the point that you're making, not to promise or say anything about whether Trump is going to testify. So they didn't say he's going to testify, or later if he doesn't, they hold it against the defense. Because you're right, the first time they really hear outside of jury voir dire the selection, the party's story is opening statement. And they frame the whole trial off of opening. And as an attorney, Dr. Weil, I think you'll appreciate this. In mock trial, when I was in mock trial, I was very, very good at opening statements. That was my forte. So attorneys, they love to do the closing arguments. They love to do the argument because the opening's just like, oh, well, here's what happened and here's what we're going to prove. And you can't argue in an opening statement. It's a statement, not an argument. So most attorneys and law students, they want the closings. They want to give this hellfire and brimstone speech that clinches the trial and wins it all for everybody. And I always thought, since mock trial with you, Dr. Weil, I thought, you know what, though? The most important part of the trial is the opening statement.
1,000%.
Because that's when they get to see you and hear you first, and whether they believe you from the beginning.
That's the thing I think is important. And that's what, and I say this about direct and cross-examination too. Everybody loves to do cross because it's, to me, like cross-examination and closing give the same vibes, right? You can be really kind of,
theatrical,
more exaggerated. Theatrical, that's the word I'm looking for.
Very embarrassing.
Right.
Right. And those are the things I love to do.
The gotcha moments.
Mm-hmm. But the direct examination and opening, to me, feel very difficult to try and do them well, because you can't be every time. This is every single time I did an opening statement, I got the same issue every time. You're being argued. You can't say that. Argumentative. From multiple teachers with everybody, because I just wanted to make my points. But I absolutely agree. I think most people have a leaning by the time you get to the closing. So I don't really think the closing is doing anything. As far as for most people, being that over the top convincing, I think a lot of people are leaning one way or another by the time you get to the closing.
Virginia, I'm sorry. One of the fascinating things I found in this trial is there were actually objections made to the defense's opening. Now, in mock trial, we don't permit that.
Correct.
But apparently and I don't know if it's a New York thing or a general thing, but there were several times where I believe the prosecution was saying, you're not positive you're going to be able to prove that, or this goes beyond the scope of this trial or whatever. Right. So that was sort of fascinating.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Is why can you object during opening? Aren't you just allowing somebody to tell their story? Then you tell your story. But it is allowed in most states. In Virginia, and it's a very hard. Do you object? Because you don't want to upset the jury who's listening, and there's always this idea of, are you risking more by upsetting the jury by interrupting? Yeah. And pausing everything, and do you look like a fool or a mean person, or do you really, it's so bad you just have to? And it's a really hard, legally, evidentiary wise, you're allowed to, and you can, and sometimes you should.
And maybe make another point, since you've mentioned that the defense did not indicate whether Trump was going to testify. Partly, we're still having this I don't think we have a ruling on the so-called Sandoval hearing.
Right.
Right. As to what information, if Trump takes a stand, what information from other trials or convictions can be used to impeach his credibility.
Exactly.
And, if all of this potentially comes in, I mean, I frankly think Trump under no circumstance, and if I were his attorney, I would not want him to, under any circumstances, to be testifying, but particularly if this is going to bring in the E. Jean Carroll case, if it's going to bring in, some of these, the Trump University fraud, all this other, they would really be having to walk around landmines.
Absolutely. And the defense is already walking a tightrope. Yes. Of what they legally can say and what they can't. And they came so close to that little rope and that line in their opening of, politics isn't supposed to be in this trial. It is supposed to be what happened in this case. Did he have an affair with Stormy Daniels? Did he pay off Stormy Daniels? Why did he pay off Stormy Daniels? Did he instruct someone else to do it for him? Did he then pay that person back? These are the basic ideas behind this case.
And documents, right?
Correct.
Did he falsify documents? And could what he did be considered an unregistered or an unlegal campaign donation?
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. Is it basically campaign finance fraud? Was he attempting with these payments to subvert the election? And they're misdemeanors in New York if it's just false business documents.
Right.
But it becomes a felony if it's done while committing another crime. Right. Or in relation to or in support of in furtherance advancement of another crime. And what the prosecution is arguing is these are all felonies. Because he was doing it for campaign, election crimes.
I do think, I will say, possibly a hot take. I do think that the opening for the defense, or their strategy at least, maybe not specifically how the opening was done, but I think they did a good job at sort of framing this. This is business as usual.
Yes.
When you're running for office, you want to hide bad stories about yourself and promote good stories. This is what that sort of framework they put around it, I did think was a solid way to approach it.
Yes.
And I think, again, I'm not sure if they're going to get conviction. I agree with you, Dr. Weil, because I do think it is really, really technical about, okay, even if all of these things happened, was Trump in the know about how this was being put into the books to a point where it would, have this culpability?
Was it his motive?
Was it his motive? Exactly.
His intent.
But I did think sort of the strategy the defense is walking in with, saying this is all a whole bunch of a mountain out of a molehill, essentially, I do think is convincing.
Well, I will tell you, and as an attorney, I agree with you.
Yeah.
But as a juror, I'm not sure.
Really?
Because, jurors, we do have some attorneys on the jury. So I think that will make a difference in this case. And there's a reason they're on there.
Attorney.
Yes, the white shoe attorneys.
I have a fun question for
episode,
you.
Right?
Yes, see our previous episode. We could, link back to that. And honestly, I think they're in favor of the defense. I mean, God knows. But I think their defense, they're the key to the defense side. Is where they can tell the jury, let's not look at all of the sleazy implications of this. Let's look at the facts and the law. I think that's the hope of the Trump team, is that these attorneys can do this because a jury is very swayed by emotions.
Yeah.
And these are odd stories. I don't know. Is there a victim on the jury panel? Is there someone who, would be really insulted and upset about him having an affair or possibly having an affair with Stormy Daniels? The prosecution is doing a good job by telling this story that smells bad.
Yeah.
And the defense keeps saying, well, it's not a crime. You can pay off people and prevent them from telling bad stories about you, even if they're true.
You can have affairs if you want.
You can do all this.
You said you were going to let me get my line in.
Yes. Go
Mitt
for
Romney, the best line that I've heard about the trial so far is that he doesn't believe anybody would pay $130,000 to have somebody not have sex with them.
Yeah. 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 And, they've come up with this great term, and I don't know if it's a common term in the industry or politics, but it's brilliant that the prosecution is using this catch and kill term for the story. Yes. Chelsea, explain what that means and how they're using it.
Okay, because this is the first time I've heard this too, was in context of this trial of essentially, news places, I'm using that term very broadly of what we're considering news, will pay people for their stories. And in this case, what they're saying is they are paying for the story, the rights to the story, the rights to tell the story, and then killing the story. So it can't go anywhere else. They've already paid for it. They bought the rights to the story, and then they are not publishing it, pursuing it. So that's what they're calling like the catch and kill, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, and it doesn't sound good. So whether it's legal, which it sounds like most of it is, it feels bad. And when juries think it feels bad, they can rule that way.
It's a complete denigration of the role of journalism.
Yeah.
Is to expose, it's not to hide stories. I mean, and I hate to say this, but, I'm sure both sides have, probably go overboard. Jon Stewart has been criticizing, I think rightly, the daily news about Trump arriving in the courthouse as though he's O.J. Simpson being chased in a car. He has to go to court every day. That really is not a big story.
Right.
But, this is twice now. Fox News, if I recall, had to pay something like $750 million in damages for basically defamation of a company that does voting machines. Neither of the, in National Enquirer, you find out that a paper that's supposed to be giving you the news is paying to suppress the news in order purposely to put their thumb on one side. And, this, he's not somebody I particularly admire, but, Ted Cruz, they libeled him by trying to associate his father, who I believe is a pastor, with the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which was just, and they admitted, I think when I was on the stand, that they had actually taken two pictures and put them side by side so it looked like the two were together.
Correct.
I mean,
they created that implication.
If anybody, my advice is grocery prices are up. And if you want to have some extra money for groceries, do not buy something right by the counter there that this kind of stuff is going on. I mean, that is not, there are better sources of news than that.
Right. Yeah. And that's why I'm saying, jurors are influenced by so many things. And the law, yes, they're supposed to follow the law. But if they get into this story and they think it's just despicable what's happening, they're going to forget the law and be like, we're going to find him guilty because he shouldn't have been doing this at all. It should be based on campaign issues. It should be based on, whether this was a business fraud. But the story is what matters. And that's why the prosecution was so smart. Dr. Weil, you were saying to create this story in their opening of there's this catch and kill scheme out there. Trump bought into it literally, gave his money for it to suppress stories, bad and negative press against him. And this witness, so let's talk about the witness. It's David Pecker, who's the owner of the National Enquirer, that he is the first witness. And he is talking about this catch and kill scheme. He seems to be testifying truthfully, seems to have credibility of this was our agreement. I liked Trump. We've had this long-standing relationship. Here's the relationship that we had. I know Michael Cohen, who seems to be the attorney fixer for Trump. We had continuing talks for the 2016 campaign about I would be on the lookout, right? I would be on the lookout for negative stories against Donald Trump, and I would suppress them with this catch and kill scheme.
And what's fascinating is he seems to have indicated, if I'm understanding his testimony, that he purposely did not get involved in the Stormy Daniels case because it was too close to the election, and he feared that he himself might be violating election law if he did this.
Right.
And the implication is that Trump was willing to go where he was unwilling to go. And that, might account for and apparently, Cohen was willing initially at least to go there too.
Well, and I think that's based on the testimony that we're getting. It appears that, I'm trying to make sure I'm getting it right, that he basically said for 2 prior stories, he agreed to bankroll them.
Yes.
To make sure they didn't speak. There was this doorman, essentially, a doorman at one of the tower or a hotel, who was going to have this story about possibly a son or a child that Trump had out of wedlock through an affair. David Pecker agreed that he had paid him off for his story and suppressed it before the election. And then,
even though it did turn out not to be true. We do have to say that. It would turn out not to be true.
Agreed. So, and yes, I'm not saying that it's true. I'm saying what they did is they found the story that this guy's alleging this, love child.
What they should have done is taken him to court for defamation.
Absolutely.
But that wouldn't
They
look
didn't
good
want the press before the election
right.
because there might be people who believed him.
Right.
So they paid the Enquirer to suppress it, and the Enquirer bankrolled it and paid the guy off so he wouldn't talk. There was a second one. There was another woman. I can't remember. McDougal, is that the name?
Yes. Susan
McDougal, who claimed to have an affair with Trump, if I'm correct.
Yes.
They found her and her story, and according to the National Enquirer, they paid her off too. They paid her off, I think, over $100,000. They paid her off too. They paid for her story and then suppressed it because the story was coming out. It's not Susan. Okay.
I screwed up. She was in the Whitewater case.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, well, it would be better if I could tell you who she...
Yeah, and I had it, and of course, all my notes are jumbled. I swear I have ADD.
Look.
Karen.
Thank you.
I mean, they sound similar. I feel like Karen, Susan, same difference, right?
Yeah. So they paid her off, but Dr. Weil, you're right. He's testifying. Mr. Pecker is testifying that when it got to Stormy Daniels, he said, and I wish I had the specific quote. I can't find it now, but it's something to the effect of, "I didn't want to have anything to do with a porn star." And Dr. Weil, you're quoting you're summarizing the other piece of the testimony is, okay, I didn't want to have anything to do with a porn star, and I didn't want to have anything to do with possible election issues, campaign issues. So he did refuse, according to his testimony, this first witness, he claims he refused to bankroll him, which is consistent with what Michael Cohen has said outside of this court case, is he paid him. Right. Or he paid, Stormy Daniels. So the Enquirer didn't bankroll
claims
this.
He was then reimbursed by Trump.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes. So Pecker says, "I said I'm not a bank. You go do it yourself." He claims he said this to Cohen. Cohen actually did. And we're going to get to his testimony. He has to be a witness. But
Cohen actually took a mortgage out on his house, apparently,
yes.
to do it. I mean, that's
to pay Stormy Daniels.
Typically would do.
And he was paying her in this catch and kill scheme. He paid her on behalf of Trump, allegedly, not to tell anybody, especially before the 2016 election voting, that she had had an affair or claimed she had had an affair with Trump. Again, regardless of truth or falsity, they didn't want the story out. They didn't want her saying it. So allegedly, he paid from his own money. According to him and what we're going to hear from his testimony or expect to hear from his testimony, it was at the behest of Donald Trump, who said he would pay him back. Now,
they're saying that's legal. And I think it's interesting. They're saying that even if all of this is true, that it's not false accounting because these can be considered legal services. I don't know, Virginia, would you let me? I mean,
I don't think I'm allowed to.
That's what I'm saying. I think the argument that these are legal services, one, I mean, you got to make the arguments you got to make. But I think it would be crazy, objectively, if we said, okay, these are legal services. So every lawyer can then just put on their website, "I'll pay off people for you."
Right.
Here's one of
the fixer.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, under legal services,
said he was.
Yeah,
right? Under legal services, we have mediation, negotiations, filing suit, and payoffs.
Yes.
I just think that
right.
I'm a payoff attorney.
Is it the I can't pronounce it. Under The Godfather, they have their own attorney for the mafia, right? It's the consigliere or whatever. I wish I'd watched it sooner, more recently. But it's like that. I feel like that's what Michael Cohen is. He's not a real attorney. Right. Because you're right. In my codes of ethics, I'm barred in three jurisdictions. And in all of my ethics codes, professional rules of conduct, they say there's very limited times an attorney can put their own money out for a client. And most of those times are to pay court filing fees.
Careful here. You have passed you are barred doesn't mean you're prohibited. It means you've passed the bar in 3 jurisdictions.
Yes. Oh, correct. Yes. I'm an attorney in 3 jurisdictions. Yes. Thank you. Right. I did not get disbarred.
Well, and I think this is the interesting thing, and I could be wrong for my understanding here, because we're talking about him mortgaging his house. So you have to keep personal money and like law firm money separately, right? So when you're saying that the attorney sort of upfronts the cost, like the firm or the attorney's firm upfronts the cost for court filings, et cetera, but not the person, right?
But then there's the other issue is he's acting like a bank with interest rates. Because the allegations that are coming out in this trial through the witnesses that we're going to continue to see are that not only did Trump authorize the direct dollar-for-dollar reimbursement, but with interest. And he was paid something like $400,000 for, thanks for this. So what do you call that? That's not an attorney fee. I'd love that interest rate.
Right. I think it was a thank you. Thanks for doing this dirty deed for me. Appreciate you, bud.
Right. And that's why I think the jury's going to struggle with the emotional side of this just doesn't sound right. If it's legal, it shouldn't be.
Okay. As a professor speaking to attorneys, he ought to just say, I got 5 phone calls from Donald Trump, $50,000 a phone call. That wouldn't be that far out, would it? From regular
Is this an unreasonable attorney's fee? That's funny. Yeah, no, that's pretty funny.
That's what I'm saying. Okay, and maybe this is me just, speculating here, right? Here's the thing. You would think people, generally like Donald Trump, Michael Cohen, right, that if you're going to fake it, like you said, Dr. Val, there would be a lot easier ways to make this money seem less suspicious, changing hands, right? You would think it would be easy to, make sure there's some calendar events on Outlook that you're like, we had an hour meeting here. We had a 2-hour meeting there. And that not that I want people to do criminal things, but it seems like there would be fairly easy ways
to cover it up.
To cover it up, right? Like they're not this. And you're like, these people have been doing this kind of stuff for a long time, allegedly.
Right. Where's the contract?
Think they'd be better at it.
Yeah. Where's the contract for the legal fees? And the prosecution
get the retainer
should
agreement?
be saying
I would
that.
Love to see that.
What did they contract for? What are the legal fees for? Where's the invoice? If I invoice somebody by retainer fee, by hourly expenses, I have to send an invoice that does a breakdown of exactly how much money I'm owed for what hours for doing what activity.
Right, what they're being charged for.
And where are those?
May I do a reminisce from a constitutional law class?
Please.
We were discussing the Fourth Amendment one time, and I said something about, a receipt from a prostitute, and somebody said, I don't think prostitutes typically give receipts. It was pretty embarrassing, but I guess I should have asked them how they knew that. I clearly did not.
That's pretty funny.
The receipt for your massage. Massage. I think that works, right?
Yeah, I love it. So with this overall story, Dr. Weil, you're the Constitution person, the constitutional law expert. Mm-hmm. Where do we get in? We keep saying, campaign issues. This is the big deal, is that it's a campaign issue. Where does the campaign part come in to this porn star possible alleging an affair, to this catch and kill scheme, to these bank falsified checks and ledgers? How does that play in?
And here's where I need my friend David Schultz, who he and I write together quite a bit. He knows campaign law a lot better than I do. You can basically give unlimited money to your own campaigns, but there are fairly strict requirements about reporting. We sort of move from amounts over X are necessarily corrupting to they're not corrupting as long as you have the light of sunshine on them. And I'm guessing that that's the primary problem, but I honestly don't know campaign law well enough to know.
Chelsea, what is your understanding? I know you and I have done a podcast on this describing, and we mentioned this last week too. We do have a podcast breaking down all 34 indictments, breaking down the story a little bit better. So if you want the full story, and even a better breakdown of the campaign portion of it, go to that. We've put it in the description. But Chelsea, what's your understanding, do you think, about how it affected campaign laws to make it a felony?
So, and I think this is what in that episode that you're talking about, that we were kind of speculating back then because they had been fairly unclear about which campaign election finance things that had been violated as the underlying felony. And so that's what we talked a lot about in that episode. And to be fair, I did not, I've read a lot of the reporting on it. And I think that's the hard thing is they're saying that this was like an illicit way to influence the election and that this was actually like the payments should have been considered like payments for the election and they weren't reported that way. And I know someone is screaming at their phone listening to this or their computer because my explanation is not that eloquent because the truth is campaign law and campaign finance law is very complicated. But that seems to be my understanding is that, like, that's the general thing is that this should have been. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Vial.
I was going to say it is in part connected to when you report things, you need to report what they were actually for rather than for something else. So I think there's an element, I guess it's not perjury because it's not in front of the court, but falsifying documents.
Right. Government documents.
Al Capone, well, I guess he got on tax evasion, but it's sort of similar that sometimes paper evidence can actually be what you can nail somebody on when you can't get them for the underlying offense.
Yeah, I think the thing is like, don't do something illegal while you're doing something illegal, right? You got to pick one.
Yeah.
If you have illicit things in your car, make sure your brake lights work. I think that's kind of
make sure you're not speeding. You don't want to get pulled over. Right.
Don't do something illegal while you're doing something illegal. And I think
don't be black. I'm sorry.
No,
driving black. I mean, that's
and that's true. A huge issue of a lot of the Black Lives Matters campaign, as I understand it, is the racial profiling was a huge instigator and inspiration to create it, which is there's so much we could go off on the racial issues and discrimination, but yes, I mean we're looking at that idea, and for the campaign finance, Chelsea, I think you've hit it on the head, and between the two of you is. The prosecution has to explain that this was not a normal year. If he had paid Stormy Daniels, either one of them, or been instructed to pay Stormy Daniels in 2008, who cares? It's not an election year. But the idea is the reason she was paid off
was to dupe the American public.
Directed by the future president was to influence the election
improperly. So you want to influence an election, right? Like you want to exert it, but it's the improper influence of essentially using all of the money and power you have to perpetrate lies.
Fraud.
Fraud. There you go.
Version, which doesn't seem to be holding up very well. Well, it's early in the trial,
right?
But the defense version is this was not so much to influence the campaign as it was to prevent embarrassment to himself and his family.
And his wife.
And one of the fascinating things about this trial is, and you guys will know this better than I do, but I think often a defendant comes in with his family and his family is not there.
Mm-hmm.
They are not in the courtroom.
If this incident occurred, it appears to have occurred, during a marriage.
Right.
So it would be a little bit harder. And, we've talked about the John Edwards trial, which in some ways was very similar. You remember, he apparently had an affair.
This is a
with
senator,
campaign worker,
prior senator.
right? I'm sorry, senator from North Carolina who was running for president. She became pregnant. They tried to pawn the child off as the product not of Edwards but of somebody else. But if you'll remember, and of course his wife was dying of cancer when this happened. It was a terrible situation.
Can I pause you for a second? I'm so sorry, and I'm going to sound so dumb.
Yeah.
What? This is, when did this, what is happening?
This was the speaker at Virginia's.
He spoke at my graduation for law school.
Yeah.
In 2005.
When did this happen? What's happening?
It was
after
2000. I graduated in 2005. So it was, he was up and coming. We invited him. He became the speaker. It was this huge deal. It must have been
2008 that he was vying for the Democratic nomination.
Yeah. And all this came out.
Yeah.
In any event.
I don't think I was paying much attention to politics at that time, unfortunately.
What I didn't get to is, for reasons that I don't fully understand, his daughter was an attorney, and his daughter actually came to court and helped defend him against these charges. And they succeeded in basically sort of, I think he did essentially say, well, I was trying as Scuzia, and he did seem, what's interesting is, at least on camera, he said, I'm responsible.
Right.
What I did was wrong. It's on me.
He at least took responsibility.
Right. He did accept that. But, one of the, I don't know. I'm assuming the jury knew, or the judge knew, that this person defending him, one of them was his daughter. But again, Pecker seems to say, as I understand it so far, that this had very little to do with protecting his family. This was
cover it up so I get elected.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the crux of it, is the prosecution is presenting it and has to, in order to win the felony charges, that the reason Michael Cohen made the payment, which was more than the limits, the election law limits for campaign financing, is that his payment to Stormy Daniels was in violation of campaign financing.
And, to put this in context, remember that this revelation or potential revelation occurs after the Access Hollywood tapes.
Yeah.
In which, the president basically says, being president, or, if you have enough money,
being Trump,
you can do what you want.
With women.
Yeah. It's a very misogynistic, chauvinistic kind of presentation. And so, I frankly, I don't know how he survived that. If you're to go to another candidate, if you remember Mr. Hart, who got caught, what was it, on a having an affair with a woman on a boat called Funny Business?
Yes.
You can't make this up. And he was almost immediately, went down in the polls. He, was a very viable candidate to that point.
Yeah, and this is where, so I think there's a divide. I think the best play for the defense is it was embarrassing to his family. He didn't want to be embarrassed by it in front of his family. I think that is the best play for them.
Yeah.
I think the other best play is to confuse the jury. Is that this is so complicated, they don't understand it enough, and since they don't understand it, and it could go either way, they just will do not guilty. I think that's the best bet they have.
And I think that is it. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off,
please.
Virginia, but I think that's it. And I heard the Daily sort of reporting on this after the first day of trial by the New York Times, and I thought it was a good point that the prosecution is really presenting this whole package of a story, and the defense is doing a really good job at not presenting a cohesive story elsewhere, but confusing and poking holes in the prosecution's thing. And I think, here's the thing, and I think this is where it gets slightly effective, in my opinion. You can say, and I think that's what the defense is saying, yeah, this was like scummy and sleazy, but it wasn't illegal, right?
Yes.
Like he is a bad, this was bad. This is going to make you feel gross about the things that happened.
You're not going to like him.
You're not going to like him, but that doesn't mean he did something illegal. And because I think the election campaign financing is so interlinked with the actual charges that you need, the elements of the statute, that it's hard. It's hard to paint this cohesive picture where you're like, this was all gross and illegal.
Yeah, this is exactly why it happened. Mm-hmm.
And to go back to the political science point that I've made previously, that argument doesn't work as well with the general public.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And, it is fascinating to see how Trump utilizes this trial. I mean, he was on again this morning, blasting everyone. And of course, as we know, and it may be today, this is a Thursday, we're taping this.
Mm-hmm.
It may be today that we actually get the ruling on whether, what the penalty, if he has in fact violated the gag order, which I believe he has, and if so, what the penalty will be. And probably more important, will the judge say this far and no farther next time it's jail? And then, of course, politically, does that make...
He becomes a martyr.
Okay, does that make, Trump an Al Capone, or does it make him a Dr. Martin Luther King?
Right.
And his argument is, I'm doing this not for me, I'm doing this for you. They would crucify you if they could. I'm taking the blame. I don't find that particularly persuasive.
Right.
But some people might. I mean, it does. He seems to play the martyr role well.
Very well.
And it's sort of fascinating as it's. Now, I personally question whether whether he should be politically classified as on the right. But this is usually the argument that the right makes against the left.
Right.
That, you're martyred because of your race or your sex or, something you can't control. And here, he's a martyr because he's in a criminal trial. Well, how did he get there in the first place? Well, his version is he's there because of Biden.
Right.
That argument doesn't particularly hold up well here because it's a state prosecution. But
I think that makes people don't understand that. I don't think there's a lot of understanding from the general public about how prosecutions happen or why they happen. Right. But I agree. I think it is absolutely, again, and I've said this every episode, I am a huge critic of our criminal legal system. But to make the argument that a man with as much power, money, influence, an older white man is the one who is being truly victimized by the system is goofy. It is a goofy thing to say when you look at what is happening in courtrooms across this country to be like, you know what is the epitome of victimization in a courtroom? Donald Trump. That's silly. That is so silly to me.
Right. This is where we go back to our prior statements is what about African Americans? What about women? Is if there's going to be someone
or the poor.
Or the poor.
People who can't afford a legal team.
How many people can afford the attorneys that Trump can afford?
Exactly.
Or how many people could actually, could afford to be in a trial 4 days a week and not be, out earning an income?
Right.
Yep.
Exactly. And I think, the trial strategy, jury selection is very particular. And there are a lot of ethical rules and Supreme Court decisions about jury selection, which we've also talked about, Chelsea and I, on the Law Unscripted podcast.
My favorite topic.
It is quite fascinating, but I tell you, you can't purposefully choose or not choose jury members based on race, right?
Or gender.
Gender or ethnicity. But I will tell you, as a former prosecutor and as a former defense attorney, I'll say two statements. As a prosecutor, I would be cheering for every woman that got sat. Because it's more likely, I think, that a woman would dislike Trump for anything he said about women or for what he was trying to do to Stormy Daniels, especially when all of this broke in the media. How many women were offended by the things that he said? How many women were offended? And I saw so many memes and so many statements of, as a woman, you should dislike Trump. As a woman, you should whatever. So as a prosecutor, the more I could play up how denigrating he was to women, or how he seemed to be using money to pay off women use women, I would play that up. Because I would hope that the females or, the men who had wives or girlfriends or new friends or whatever, daughters would be playing that up. Is this a good man? Whereas the defense, Chelsea, I think you're spot on. And my best defense trial I ever did was a case where I was, the theme from the very opening to the very end was, this was stupid and immoral.
Yes.
You're not going to like it. You're not going to agree with what he did, but it wasn't a crime. And I think they have to focus on that. Confuse the jury first, and if they figure it out, then say, well, it wasn't a crime. It was stupid. You may not like it. You don't have to like it. You don't have to like him. How many defense attorneys have I heard where they say about their clients, you don't even have to like my client? But that doesn't mean you rule against my client. And I think they're doing well so far with that. And I'm interested to see their cross-examination of David Pecker.
Yes. And I think there's also this element of it. And this is what I struggle with too. I have opinions, obviously, about Trump as a person, as a political figure. And I think my personal belief, I'm not in the trial, I'm not seeing the evidence.
Right.
I think this was not done correctly. I don't know if the prosecution can prove it, right? Like, because you can have that gut feeling of like, I think this is how it played out, but I don't think they've proven their case beyond, reasonable doubt. I think that's another part of it. Okay, I have a question because I love when we make predictions. I'm going to come back for both of you because this is the criminal trial and not a civil trial. And defendants have a legal right to get up on that stand despite their attorneys begging and pleading for them not to. Do you guys think Donald Trump will take the stand?
Yes. I don't think he can help himself.
That's same.
I don't. Now
he has helped himself before, though.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah. He didn't testify in the first Eugene Carroll case.
Right. But he didn't have to be in the courtroom listening to everything that I think gets him truly fired up.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Your vote is no, Dr. Vile?
My vote is no.
My vote is yes. And this is interesting because it brings us back to our talk with our mentioning of O.J. Simpson. And he was one of the attorneys who's still alive who represented O.J. Simpson was in the news about this. I think it was Dershowitz, where he made a statement. He did this whole article that was about him that says, well, if I told O.J. Simpson not to testify, and if he had said he was going to testify and he testified, I would have taken myself out as counsel. And he said, he allegedly told O.J. Simpson, if you testify, I'm out. I will not represent you.
You'd only have 16 other attorneys.
Right. And of course, there are other attorneys, but according to him, it would have been this very dramatic thing of if O.J. Simpson had said, no, I'm testifying, he would have said as an attorney, I can no longer represent you. And what he has said recently in the news in this article that I read, and God knows which one it was, there's so many out right now, but it was basically, if I were Trump's lawyer, I would tell him the same thing I told O.J. Simpson, don't testify. And I told O.J. Simpson not to, he didn't testify and he was acquitted. I would do the same with Trump. If he decided to testify, I'd be out and I think he's going to be found guilty. That's what the attorney said.
Did O.J. not testify at all?
No. Now, he put on the gloves because the prosecutors told him to.
Okay, but he was not. Okay, that makes more sense. Sorry, I was like, did that not happen? Okay, so here's this is interesting because I, unfortunately, am going to side with Virginia here. I think being in that courtroom is upsetting him, and he cannot control himself. And he has now the legal right to get up there, right? And I think the bigger problem is, right, the constitutional protections. We gotta love it. But I think what it would be interesting, because when you're directing someone, and Virginia is so good at this, I struggle with direct examination. For the life of me, I just cannot. However, especially when you have a criminal defendant, you really want to narrow your direct so you do not open the door. However,
he will open
he will open and I think that's the scariest part about him getting up on the stand is not that what he will say within, a normal scope of questions of what this trial is about. Right. I think he will open the door for anything and everything because he cannot shut his mouth.
No, I agree.
That's the contempt, yeah.
I mean, I think his attorneys are going to be on their knees begging him not to.
in open court, sobbing.
Part of this might be influenced by this gag order thing.
Yes.
If the judge comes down hard enough on him for this, there's a chance that he will. It's going to, in my judgment, it's going to be hard for Trump on the stand not to perjure himself.
Yes.
And that is a separate crime.
Correct.
And so
his attorney is going to be standing there like, Your Honor, I actually cannot ask any questions because
he's going to have to let him testify on his own.
He loves a good monologue, a soliloquy. Let him get up there. But
Can you do that?
Yes, you have to. In some cases, you have to. Ethical rules in some states, including the ones I practice in, say if you know your client's going to lie, you cannot ask him any questions. He gets to testify on his own monologue.
But isn't an objection if somebody does a monologue?
Not in this case. Not in the case of a defendant.
Not in a case where we're pro se.
Correct.
Yeah,
where they're testifying on their own without counsel. Yeah. Correct.
Which is interesting because you have, and I think this is the thing that is like the legal fictions we create with the ethical rules of an attorney. Like, right, you're have a jury and you're saying, I know my client's going to lie. You're not saying that out loud, but by not participating in the direct examination of your client, you're saying my client is a liar, which I think
I had that happen once to me in a jury, and I was so shocked.
That's my nightmare. That is truly.
Did you have to let somebody testify that you didn't want to?
We couldn't. We couldn't say. This is the thing: is we could not explain to the jury why the attorney wasn't asking him questions.
Yes.
Why he was talking by himself. It just had to let him talk. It was awful.
Funny, but it is kind of funny.
Did it serve him well?
It did. He was.
He did okay?
Yes. I was so shocked. Well, and that's the thing is I couldn't prevent him from lying, and I couldn't prove that he was.
Right.
And I couldn't object to everything that he was saying.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So he was charged in Virginia with malicious wounding, which is a very serious crime. And the jury found him guilty of only assault and battery. I was like, what has the world come to? And I'm convinced it was this defendant talking by himself, but we couldn't tell them. Right. He's only talking by himself with that as his attorney because his attorney knows he's going to lie. Right. I couldn't tell them that. I hoped they inferred it, but they didn't.
No. But, and this is where we talked about sort of last episode, the idea of sequestering the jury, because, okay, even if, right, like the judge has said, do not look anything at the news, but I would Google, why did the attorney stop questioning the client?
Absolutely.
Right? Even if you're not using specifics about Trump, the news, the coverage of it,
there's other
I
Google
think
searches.
I would have a hard time, and this is why they won't let me on a jury, is because I know what jury nullification is. And if I saw something like that and didn't know, hadn't been to law school and forced to take the MPRE, would be like, something is weird. I've never seen this before. I would go Google it. If I still had access to my phone the minute I walked out of that courtroom, I would Google it and tell
I vote to keep you off juries. I'm sorry.
Trust me, I have attempted to get on juries. I can't control my facial expressions. And so when someone says something and my face is like, then they're like, you gotta go.
I can commend. I did go back and watch Runaway Jury.
You did after we recommended it last week.
You recommended, and it is. I think it's stretched a little bit.
Of course.
But it wasn't. It was a very fascinating plot, and it was set in New Orleans, where I had just visited.
Yes.
So it's always
accent,
nice always nice to see a movie and see places that you have visited.
Yes.
I'm so glad. Yes. Last week we recommended, because it was jury selection for the first week of Trump's trial, I recommended watching Runaway Jury, which I think is the best movie out there regarding jury selection. So I'm glad you liked that. Okay, so
it's on I've downloaded it. I just haven't watched it yet. So it's on mine too. So I'm excited. I'll report back next week about my thoughts.
Please do.
And I did look though. It was the book I read. I have read the book.
Nice.
I just didn't know it was also a movie. So I will be
Usually it's the opposite. I wish I had students that when I said something, they would say, I've read the book and haven't seen the movie.
Yeah.
It's almost always the opposite.
As a professor, I can understand
Yes.
that. All right, so let's briefly talk about this contempt issue. And then we're gonna sign off on this one, and we'll figure out how and when to get the other one done. But we've briefly mentioned the contempt issue, and we know there was a hearing about, did Donald Trump violate the gag order, which prevents him from publicly talking about any witnesses, any potential witnesses, and the jurors, and the court family, the courtroom administrators and family. He can talk about the judge. He can talk about the prosecutors. But everything else seems to be off limits. And they did have the hearing Tuesday, and it was fascinating. I especially loved the judge's comments. He didn't seem to be buying into the defense. They were arguing, and Dr. Vallow, go back to this. You mentioned it earlier where you said, isn't he supposed to be able to defend himself? If someone calls him a liar, shouldn't he be able to say, well, I'm not a liar, you're a liar? I mean, it's kind of playground speech in my opinion, but that's neither here nor there. But in this case, the attorney, Todd Blanche, continued to argue that his client was responding to political attacks, right, in his post. And he didn't believe he was violating the orders. And the judge kept asking him, what is he responding to? And I know that's not the correct sentence structure, so forgive me, English majors. To what is he responding? But the judge kept asking, show me these posts that to which he's responding. Show me these posts. And the defense never produced them. They never produced them.
There have actually been, I have seen Cohen make statements that Trump is a liar. And I don't personally understand why the gag order applies to Cohen.
Why it applies to Trump and not Cohen. Mm-hmm.
Right. I understand why it would apply to family members.
Right.
Or to other witnesses who have not spoken.
Right.
And particularly to jurors. I mean, jury intimidation is a real concern.
It's huge. Huge. And that's a good question. And for Cohen, I think the issue, and Dr. Vallow, you're saying, hasn't he called Trump a liar? I believe he has, but the question is when. And it's an issue of currency.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, recency versus, latency, so to speak. And they're saying, ultimately the judge is saying, well, how recent are these statements to which he's responding? And Todd Blanche, the attorney, never produced any. And the judge's response was the following, and it's quoted in the media. Judge Merchant said, Mr. Blanche, you're losing all credibility. I have to tell you that right now, you're losing all credibility with the court. And that's in response to this, where he continued to say, okay, if his intention wasn't to intimidate anybody, but was to respond to what's in the media against him, then prove it. Show me the media. Show me these statements. And he couldn't. And I will tell you, for an attorney, that is a damning statement by a judge to you.
I would be embarrassed. I would be so embarrassed because the whole thing is we keep bringing up professional obligations because I think anyone who's on the Trump legal team is being put in a position truly where I would be on the hotline, calling the professional responsibility hotline on a daily basis because so many of these things are walking that line of you're not supposed to. You're supposed to have candor with the court.
Candor to the court. That's it.
Mm-hmm. You're not supposed to make frivolous arguments. Any argument you make should be in good faith.
Yes.
And I think that the judge saying that says you violated your professional and ethical responsibilities.
You're not making this argument in good faith.
Between the rock and the hard place.
Yes.
This is what Trump, for his campaign and for other reasons, wants him to say.
Right.
Yes. And I do think I do have a lot of sympathy. Maybe that's not the right word, but
that's a good one.
For the attorneys,
Trump's attorneys. Mm-hmm.
Trump's attorneys, I really do. Obviously they took the job. That is what it is. Right. But to be put in a position where, a career worth of good work is going to be down the drain because you took on a client and were trying to walk that fine line in court.
It's going to be scrutinized. Everything they do is scrutinized.
There's no winning, right? There's no winning there. And I do have some sympathy for them for that.
Yeah. And I think so. let's go to the pundits, the legal pundits that are on, CNN and Fox and all the other places there. Most of what I'm hearing, and let me see if you're hearing the same thing, and maybe we're on the same stations or not, is most legal experts, as they're calling them, are claiming that they don't think Trump is going to go to jail for these, but that he will be fined for the comments and seriously admonished, not to violate the gag order, to be told that, yes, he did violate the gag order, and at least in specific statements, maybe this did and this didn't, and warned that if you continue this behavior, you could be put in jail. Dr. Weil, do you agree with those comments?
Do I think that? Yeah, I think it's likely that that's what the judge would do. I think he would really be playing into Trump's game book right now to immediately put him in jail. Although this is hardly the first offense.
Right.
But
right.
Perception often is as important as reality.
Yeah, and allegedly, in the news, they're saying that Trump's already violated it again after the gag order hearing on Tuesday by referring to Michael Cohen, a potential witness, as a liar. So Chelsea, what are your thoughts about the pundits?
I think they're right. I think they're right. I think the likelihood now, I think if the judge wanted to do, sort of the thing to you stop one issue and create another, right? I think if his primary and only focus was to stop Trump from violating the gag order, he would put him in jail. However, I think Dr. Weil is absolutely right that doing that would create a whole other slew of issues, because the reality is this is playing out, not just in the courtroom, but in a public sphere. So I think he's unlikely to do that. What I think is funny is there's not a single person I've heard that says this was not a violation of the gag order. Like, I have not heard anyone say that.
That's a good point.
We have all been like, oh yeah, this is a very clear violation.
What should they do about it?
Because he's leveraged himself as a martyr, the judge is not going to do what he would do to someone who is poor. Or I cannot imagine a regular defendant behaving like this and not ending up in jail. I cannot see that playing out ever.
Right.
What would be interesting, and I don't know if it could be legally done, but the admonishment would be, if you continue this when we have final jury instructions, you're going to use this as an indication of your character or your credibility.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know that would be legal or not.
I think the only way his credibility comes into it is if he gets on the stand. Then we can talk about his credibility as a witness.
Yeah. And that's why I don't think he's going to, but it's 2-1.
I'm going to say.
In many ways, I would be delighted if he would appear on the stand, because it would be so much more fascinating than if he doesn't.
Grab me some popcorn.
Lawyer, oh my gosh, I seriously, that's when I'm going to drive up. Chelsea, you're going to have to run the law office.
Look, no, I got to be there
with
too.
me.
Look. Let me live tweet it out. No, but what I think would be funny,
on the road.
What I think would be funny, and I say funny very loosely, but if I was the prosecutor, and I say this as someone who's never prosecuted a crime, to be clear, this is just me, chatting. If I was the prosecutor at this point, I would want him to take the stand, because he will be out of control once he's up there. So I think I'm going to attempt, before I rest my case, to fire him up, get some people to say some things. Mm-hmm. Yes, that I am going to push and push and push on those buttons so that it pushes him to the point that he is going to fire his attorneys and jump up on the stand and represent himself. That would be my goal at this point. Because I would think, in my brain, the moment he gets up there, it's over. I've won the case. So all I need to do at this point is just push the buttons enough.
Just get him up there and you're fine. Yeah. So I'm going to do my predictions, and then I'm going to ask one more question, and we're going to end for this episode. I'm going to stay with my prior statements from last week. Mm-hmm. I do believe that he will go to jail over the contempt issue. Okay. I don't know about the jury as far as guilt or acquittal. Okay, I'm not going to make a prediction on that. I honestly think at this point it could go either way. Mm-hmm. But as far as the contempt issue, I don't think he can help himself. I don't think he will. I agree with both of you that I don't agree that this time he's going to go to jail. I don't think the judge can risk it. I think he's going to do an admonishment. I think he's going to determine, yes, these are contempt. No, he shouldn't be making these statements. They're violating the gag order. I'm going to do a warning of you can be in jail. Mm-hmm. And I think it will depend on how many more times this comes up. Yeah. But I think ultimately for a regular defendant, it would not be stood for.
The first time they violated it, the judge would be like, this is your one and only warning.
Yes.
Then you will be in jail.
You will be sitting in jail and we will bring you out for the trial so that you don't have an opportunity to speak.
Yeah.
I think the judge ultimately, within one or two more violation hearings, after having warned Trump on the record again, after the formal hearing, I think he's going to have a very difficult decision. And this is where we get into the reasons he's not supposed to be speaking. He's not supposed to be violating this gag order is for intimidation. Because as a judge, unfortunately, I think Merchant has to look at the public in addition to the trial itself. Yes. And the public and political implications of jailing Donald Trump are so heavy that a judge is not supposed to consider this, which is why the gag order is there. The jury is not supposed to consider what Trump and his followers could do. A witness is not supposed to consider it. But a judge is supposed to be neutral. And I do believe that this judge is trying to be. I really do.
But he's a human being.
He is. And how much do you put into, you're supposed to, by your job description, consider only the facts before you. But I cannot imagine that this judge or any judge in a Trump case would not at least be thinking to himself, what are the real political and personal implications if I put him in jail? Will I be instigating the riots? Will I have created the martyr? And
Will I be endangering my family?
Right. Instead of the idea of, most judges would be like, well, they weren't responsible for themselves. It's their fault that they're in jail. The idea behind this defendant is that he would use it as, it's not my fault. It's your fault. So it becomes a political statement against Merchant and the system, using people. And I am giving more of an opinion. And again, people can hate me. Please don't write nasty statements. But it's the idea of Trump can say whatever he wants, but none of the rest of us can. And so
I thought when everybody else was on trial, they were thugs. I've yet to hear somebody call Donald Trump a thug. I'm just saying, right? If we had any other regular defendant being charged with 34 counts, I'm just saying. Right. But apparently people have just, swapped opinions. So glad to have criminal justice reformers on our side now.
Yeah, it's hard. And as an attorney, I really sympathize with all of the players in this case, and especially the judge. And honestly, there were times where I thought of being a judge. And at this point, you would have to, as a punishment, put me as a judge. Because
they lost the nose goes game. They were like, who's going to take this case? Not me.
They used to say a judge is a former governor who made friends with the president. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't think you have to worry about it anytime soon.
Yeah. But, how many times are you expected to put your personal fears and thoughts and feelings and ideas and opinions away, but for a trial? And it's as much as the legal system we have is so good compared to how many other countries. Mm-hmm. We have a fantastic legal system, but the people who intimidate the legal system and push it and intimidate the players in the legal system, whether it's Trump or just his statements that are instigating them, there are people in this case who are pushing on the players of the trial. In more than in other cases, more than other regular defendants that aren't former presidents. And it is already, whatever statements are said or not said, it's already an intimidating situation.
And it is. I think, no, go ahead, Dr. Vile.
You have a former president who has already brought into question the Justice Department, the FBI, almost every other institution of government other than himself.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a serious situation for sure.
Yeah. So I have a lot more predictions for good or for ill. I'm hoping one of our predictions comes true. So maybe CNN or whoever might call us. But for those of you who listen that aren't CNN and Fox, I hope you're enjoying.
I'm feeling the vibes out there and, making our predictions.
Yeah, we're making predictions. We've got the vibes going on. Hopefully our conversation today gave you some new information, gave you some new insight, made you chuckle a time or two, maybe scared you. I don't know. It scares me every time we talk. But please hit like or subscribe. Join our channel to follow us as we go along in the coming weeks and as we continue our program. Don't forget, we will be doing a Trump episode every week to follow each week of the Trump trial. And stay tuned for our next episode about the privileged immunity Supreme Court arguments. So that's what's up next. Go to our website, thelawunscripted.com. That's where you'll find our free podcasts and the connections to audio and video through YouTube and other sites, as well as our links to the bar and law school prep classes. So thank you for joining us for the Legal Weekly Wine. We hope you grabbed a glass of your own wine for a good happy hour, and we will catch you next time on the Legal Weekly Wine.